Hello, and this will be a bit of a rant, maybe, we will see. Nightmare Baller 1 basically has told me that I need to make a video on this because my perception of this is very different than most people. And that's if you haven't heard, I'm sure I'm going to put this in the title, so I'm sure most people probably have that are going to see this. DC Comics has decided to reboot the entire DC universe, and so every comic is apparently going to go back to issue 1. They're going to tweak the origins of everybody. They're going to change some things up. For example, I would expect that Superman and Lois Lane probably aren't going to be married. Dick Grayson could very much be Robin again. There could be all sorts of wacky stuff going on. We don't know. And there's a big uproar about this. People are very upset about it, which I understand. But, you know, I am not a big DC fan to start with. I'm not someone that, when I was more into the big two, I only read one comic now that is even published by the big two. And that is Rouge, which is an imprint from Marvel. It's not even a true Marvel book. That, yeah, so I've never been a big DC fan to start with. So there's, the only books I ever really read from DC is I read Jurgen's Superman, read, Batman. I really do like Batman. And a lot of the Vertigo stuff. But as far as proper DC universe, no. So I don't have a big investment into it that a lot of other people do. The other announcement was that as soon as this launches, it's going to be same-day digital. Everyone's all excited about that. At least that part of it. But you have a lot of people who are upset about the other part of it, and are going into full nerd rage. My take on this is so the fuck what. Honestly, this changes nothing. This doesn't change any of the problems that DC and Marvel face, and that the comic book industry faces. It doesn't. People are going to point to the digital stuff. Here's the thing. Youth, because let's be honest about this. The reason why the comic book business is in the situation it is in is because of one reason. That's because they have forgotten, they completely ignored for far too long the 12 to 14 year age bracket, and they weren't building new fans. And so as older fans kind of outgrew comics, or just were like, comics are kids stuff, whatever, they didn't have this new fan base coming up, and now it's come to bite them in the ass over the last 10 years. People are going to disagree with me on that, I understand, but I don't care. That's face it, your comic book industry is where it is today because kids don't read comics. Now, why don't they read comics? There's a whole reason for that. But one of the main reasons, and this is when they first announced this, I was kind of like, oh, maybe they're actually going to relaunch everything, and they're going to make it so that kids, that age group, it'll be easier for kids to actually get it back into these characters, to, all of this stuff. They're going to maybe gear this not as adult as DC Comics has been over particularly all of the books. And then Grant Morrison is going to be on Superman, and the comic book fans, oh, it's so wonderful. Guess what? That's bullshit, is what that is. Because Grant Morrison on Superman is stupid. Why is it stupid? Here's why. Superman, Spider-Man, both books, all ages, should always be all age books. No question, no denying it. Every fanboy is going to come on here and say, I don't know what I'm talking about. Guess what? Let's see, both of those books, which are arguably two of the most important superheroes there is, okay, and their past, the way their characters are, everything is geared more towards something you could gear towards a younger audience, okay, are at their lowest readership ever, okay. You don't think that might be because kids aren't reading them? Because you're going to have to get kids reading these books, and creating alternate books that aren't part of the actual universe, that aren't in continuity with the rest of the comic books that you make, okay, because you have this big universe of comics, is a mistake. And when you put a guy on a book that definitely is not going to write in a way that you're going to get new, younger readers reading that book, you failed. And you failed in major, huge ways. And this is what annoys me about this whole thing, is that are going to announce all their new, creative teams and all of this stuff, and none of it. I would be shocked if any of these books, they're going to say, you know what, we've decided that this book is going to be geared for a younger audience. Not one. Not a single one is going to be like that. Everyone that sees this probably knows that, and it's a mistake. It's a mistake on the grandest level. And then people are going to say, well, but we're going to have digital comics. So you're going to have digital comics. Digital books. Digital makes up 11% right now. 11% of print, quote, quote, media that is sold. Okay? 11%. You know how much youth books take up? We're talking Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, all of those type books. They make up 6% of that 11%. Okay? Yeah, like nothing. And if you're not gearing to get the comics into kids' hands, then you have failed. You've had a renaissance of young adult and youth books and literature, and comics are sitting on the wayside and seeing their numbers dwindle and not doing a damn thing about it. Why? Because they're listening to the fanboys who continually say, don't change my books. Don't make my books okay for these kids because I'm going to stop reading them. Guess what? All 40,000 of you, your book can go away. You can go away so that we can bring in 200,000 kids to read our books. That is what they need to do. The fact that they're not doing this, the fact that there is no plan to do this, just shows that they're still clueless. That they're absolutely clueless and they don't know what to do. And people are going to say, well, there's nothing you can do. Kids just aren't going to read it. No, do you know why kids aren't reading comics? Is because they don't have access to comics. And people who say, well, they can go to... No, going to a comic book store is not having access to comics. Kids have to be able to find these comics out in the open. We need to get comics out of the comic book store and back out into the general public so that people can say, hey, look, there's a comic book. Or a little kid goes up and says, or a kid just goes up and says, hey, here's a comic book, and starts reading it. Anyone that doesn't think that happens, go to Disney World. Go to Disneyland. I've had friends for the last 2 years tell me when they have gone that because Boom Studios prints Disney comics, they'll have the comics set in there, and that when they have like the shops and whatnot, one of the most busiest areas for these kids are around the comics. It's not the fact that kids don't want to read comics. It's the fact that A, you have the two big companies don't write comics that these kids want to read within their universe because they write, they do these books that don't take place. Kids want to read proper comics. They don't want to read, oh, here's the kitty comic for you. No, they want to read proper comics. They don't want to read Kitty Superman. They want to read Superman. So you say, here's Superman. We made it so that you can read it and so that, the 30-year-old that still likes Superman can still read it. There's 30-year-olds that read Harry Potter. You can't, come on. This is not difficult. This is not hard. The problem is access. And that really falls upon really not so much DC and Marvel, but more of Disney and Warner Brothers, and actually getting their acts together and figuring out that, all these characters and all these stories that we have and the years of stories we have aren't going to mean jack. All of these millions of dollars we can make off these franchises aren't going to mean jack if we don't have new stories, new blood, if we don't have new characters being created and all of this stuff. So maybe we need to invest a little bit and actually try to get these comics into these kids' hands. That's what needs to be done. If that's not being done, then everything else that's done, that's just, who cares? Honestly, it is. And what really annoys me is that every time one of these big announcements happens and all this, oh, well, this is going to change the comic book industry, I go to all these comic book sites, I don't see a single person ask that question. Well, is this going to get, younger readers back into comics? That should be the first question asked. Every year, at San Diego Comic-Con, that should be the first question that is asked of Marvel and DC. What are you doing to get kids back into comics? That should be the first question. And until they answer it, every person that asks a question, that should be the question. Because that is the most important question for comics today. There is no other question. Comics are going to die if they don't start getting kids to reading comics. Now, this is very important to me. And here's why. Because if it wasn't for comics, I probably wouldn't know how to read. I have severe dyslexia. Severe dyslexia. And if it wasn't for comics, I hated reading. The only reason why I trudged through and tried to read comics was because superheroes and this and that and the other, and it was something I actually enjoyed trying to read. Now, I can't imagine for every one of me, I'm sure there was, was at least 10 other guys just like me that have the exact same story. Now, how many kids who come up today who, don't have the access to comics, who aren't going to have that and now have to find something else? They're going to try to trudge through a big, giant, Harry Potter book? I don't think so. So what are you going to do? I mean, that's the thing. Comics are so great and so wonderful, and they're being, kids are being denied them because older fans can't separate that, maybe the stories need to be a little less adult so that we can widen the audience and everything be better. And it doesn't necessarily mean bad. I mean, how many comic book fans, bow at the altar of The Invincible or The Incredibles? That's a kids movie that is suitable for all ages. You can't do a comic like that. You can't, do a comic with the same theme and same thing. I'm not saying all comics should be like that, by the way. I mean, there's, like X-Men. X-Men is a big, cornerstone book. X-Men, probably going back to the 70s, has never been a book like that. Spider-Man, Superman, they were. Justice League, they were. You have all of these other books that definitely, over the years, were definitely more for all ages that now aren't. And now you don't have these books. You don't have these books within, the bigger universe that are not part of that. And that's the problem. And so you can change all the numbers back to 1. You can fiddle with the characters all you want. But unless you actually put people on that creative staff that their sole goal is, okay, we have to start putting out stories that kids want to read so that we can, and then finding a way to put these books in kids' hands so that they can find them, any gimmick, anything else you come up with, doesn't mean jack. It doesn't. That's what needs to be done. And so for every single person that's getting upset, get upset. Because to me, DC needs to go back and do what they did 10 years ago and basically say to all of the older fans, sorry, we're going to start gearing towards the younger fans because if we don't, we're going to die. And guess what? They're still going to die unless they do that. So piss them off that way instead of reverting everything back to 1, playing with the characters, whatever. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what I got to say. This means jack shit is what this means. And unless the comic book industry decides to get its act together and actually go out of its way and try every single possible way it can to put, comics back in the hands of kids and make them cheaper, that's the other thing. Guess what, folks? I don't need glossy paper. I don't need pretty, I don't need the art to look absolutely perfect. I go back and I read my old comics that were print on newsprint that, the ink kind of ran together, that the colors aren't necessarily the most vibrant things in the world. They still hold up. Why is that? Because the stories are good and the art's good and, so what if the colors don't look, wow? You don't necessarily need that. I've got kids that I've had look through my comics. They're just as easy to read the old stuff that's on newsprint as the new stuff that's on glossy paper. So, why even do that? Why do any of this? None of it matters unless you're getting the books into kids' hands and you're creating new fans. That's what you have to do. You have to get new readers. If you're not getting new readers, if your goal is, we're going to come up with a gimmick to try to get people who maybe were into comics that are now out of comics. That seems to be the goal. Instead of saying, screw those people, let's try to get these younger fans into comics so that we can groom them and they can be comics. Maybe some of them become comic books fans for life. Maybe some of them don't. Then we groom some other ones. And we keep doing that way. And it becomes, like that. That's what needs to be done. Can it be done? I don't know. And people are going to say, well, you don't have an idea. Okay, well, let's see. How about this? How about if DC and Marvel, if Warner Brothers and Disney get together and say, you know what? We're going to create cheaper comics. We're going to then, since we can't put them into stores, okay, we're going to come out with our own version of Redbox, where you can go up and you can buy these comics, and kids can maybe they're $1.50, and they can walk out, just be like the little toy machines that are outside, all the Walmarts and all the grocery stores and whatever, where you get the little knickknacks, and they can get a comic instead, and they go, oh look, I got a comic. And every time they go to the grocery store, maybe they get another comic, and now you've started trying to get kids back into comics. Because that's what you need to do. What's the purpose of creating all of these cartoons based on these comic book characters if you're not converting that audience into comic book fans? If you're not doing that, then what's the point? What's the point? That should be kind of the offset of, ooh, let's use these, let's make money off these, let's make cartoons off of them and make money, but then let's try to get these kids to buy comics so then we can continue to make money off of them. I don't know, maybe that's just me, maybe I know nothing. But yeah, if you're not, if the idea is reboot this and then not gear most of the books back towards a younger audience, it doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. And I've rambled long enough. I'm out. Later.